Jeff, you're on.
All right. Well, welcome to you guys. You're in Boulder. Is this where you are?
Yes.
Okay. Been a long time since I've been up there. Used to live in Longmont and various areas around there, and used to ride my bike all the time in Boulder. Nice trails. Where do I start? As with anything along these lines and dealing with the government, it's always a rabbit trail that is convoluted and goes back and forth and up and down and in and out, and it's some of this stuff. It's a paradigm changer if you allow it to be, and to believe that our government has been lying to us and cheating us for ever since World War II on the topic of income, and I use income in quotes, which you'll find out. This information has been developing, I'd say, at least the last 25 years, but probably some of the old timers who really started pioneering the research into the IRS and what it really is went back before that, and that's when they had to actually go to the law libraries. They had to travel. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have computers that make all of this stuff possible now for anybody to know or even research. So it's we have gratitude to those people, and the issue is the IRS and what has been labeled as an income tax. Now, you can see the picture there, that first one. That's pretty much the way it is for most, middle-class Americans and the poorer people among us. It is a huge burden, and the problem is that most Americans haven't stopped long enough to ask themselves a simple question: why did we allow the government to tax us on something that we hate? Everybody hates the IRS, so the question is, why does it still exist if the people are the ones that are in charge of government, which by law and by the Constitution we are? Let me give you a little bit of a background. I was challenged on this whole topic back in 2002, essentially, and that was the last year that I filed a 1040 form, and I filed a zero return, basically claiming and stating that I did not receive any lawful income. The IRS accepted that and gave me my refund, and then a week later I got another letter from the IRS stating, we're rejecting your tax return, and it was too late because I already cashed the check. But it just shows you how conflicting even those guys were, at least back then. They're wising up to a lot of these arguments, but it's all based on fraud. So what I did is I started creating a paper trail asking the IRS questions. It was much more detailed and much more wordy back then, but now it's gotten fine-tuned to where you can just ask some very basic questions of the IRS. But in doing that, you're establishing a record with them that you are bringing up challenges to their presumptions and hearsay, which they've been using against us, like I said, since World War II. So as I started challenging them over the years, they eventually came to the point where they filed summons with, they tried with me, but that's easy to shut down, your personal records and stuff, but then they went after my bank, my various banks, my mortgage company, anybody that I was doing business with, because they wanted my financial records. And I filed suit in 7 different states in 7 different federal courts. to quash the summons, and I have provided evidence that I've been using for a long time since then. And as you can see, I've been in at least 12 courts, and twice it went to the United States Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court didn't want to touch it. Because they don't take something doesn't mean that they have looked at it and ruled on it. They just they look at the subject and they don't want to touch it. But the interesting irony about it is that all of the evidence against the IRS comes from the United States Supreme Court in multiple rulings, and we'll get into a number of those here shortly. But anyway, I ended up going through all those, included the tax court, the appeals court, and right now I'm in the United States Court of Federal Claims, which calls itself the People's Court and the nation's conscience. So we'll see if either one of those is true. So the issue is, everyone knows death and taxes, right? And income tax is something that's classic, but the problem is, does anyone know what the actual legal, lawful definition of income is? I didn't, and most people don't. You just presume that, well, what's your income? Well, I get a paycheck, I get a wage or a salary or compensation for service every week or every month, and that's my income. Well, no, it isn't. We're going to get into that. And as I mentioned, it is a paradigm shift, but it's one that is empowering, because once you realize what the laws actually say, and it makes you less fearful of the IRS. And knowledge is power. Let's just put it that way. So the basic things I'll discuss today is what is income, how the IRS is assessing people when they do it on their own, and it's fraudulent on multiple levels, but I'll explain what they did with mine primarily. They are claiming that I owe them $300,000 in past taxes for 4 tax years, 2003, 4, 5, and 6. They haven't done anything about all the other years after that. And I don't think they will, because I've cost them way more than this $300,000 in all these court cases since, I think it started 3 or 4 years ago. I can't even remember. And the third topic is the 16th Amendment fraud, because that is the law that they claim validates their ability to tax. In other words, they're saying the 16th Amendment is what provided the law for taxing income. And even that by itself is a fraud too, which we'll get into. Now we lived in this country 150 years without any kind of an income tax. And in 1913, as you read, the IRS was formulated, as it were, it'll reformulate it. The Federal Reserve was created, and the 16th Amendment was passed. And they all three are related in ways that we really won't get into today, but they are all three frauds and perpetrated by private parties. The Federal Reserve is a private banking cartel. It has nothing to do with the federal government, technically. It's as federal as Federal Reserve or Federal Express. But anyway, every penny of tax, of so-called income tax that we pay on wages, are wages that goes to pay only the interest on the national debt. It doesn't pay for roads or school or any other service that the government has. And you can find that under the Grace Commission, and I do have another slide somewhere else, but I'll leave it at that. But it's just President Reagan commissioned that Grace. I can't remember what his full name is, but to find out, hey, where is all this money going? I want to know. I want a detailed analysis of where the money is going, and I want to start to cut some of this stuff. So that's what they came up with, is that every penny of actual money that comes into the government, as far as taxes on our wages, goes to pay the interest on the national debt, which is another fraud. And again, that's a whole other story on the banking system. So it's basically a collusion between our government and the IRS and the Federal Reserve. Now, question to ask, we hear the mantra all the time of taxpayers. The taxpayers are this, the taxpayers are that, it's costing the taxpayers, all of this. Well, everyone presumes that they're a taxpayer. Well, that's not necessarily true because there is a difference between a taxpayer and a non-taxpayer. Now, I want to clarify here that an income tax is a constitutional, lawful tax. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. But it's only a tax on somebody that is a taxpayer. And we'll find out what makes you a taxpayer. Let's look at here. This is the Supreme Court ruling back in 1922. It says the revenue laws are a code or system in regulation of tax assessment and collection. They relate to taxpayers and not to non-taxpayers. The latter, non-taxpayers, are without their scope. No procedure is prescribed for non-taxpayers, and no attempt is made to annul any of their rights and remedies in due course of law. With them, non-taxpayers, Congress does not assume to deal, and they are neither of the subject nor of the object of the revenue laws. Well, right there's got to be a red flag stating, okay, well, what makes me a taxpayer versus a non-taxpayer? This is another case here in 1972, quite a few years, decades actually, after the Rasmussen. Persons who are not taxpayers are not within the system and cannot benefit by following the procedures prescribed for taxpayers. In other words, if you're a non-taxpayer, you're outside of that system. It's nothing to do with you, and you have nothing to do with it. The IRS, the government, has no authority over you on that subject. So what makes you, personally, everyone in that room, a taxpayer? Well, it's one simple thing. If you owe the tax, if it's a tax that you personally, lawfully, legally owe, and that can be proven. If you don't owe the tax, you are not a taxpayer. Now, it sounds pretty archaic, but pretty Neanderthal. It's very simple stuff. So let's go into the first thing. What is income? And again, I have already talked about the fact that it's been presumed that it's our wages or salary or compensation for service. But that is a fraud. Let me go back here before you start reading that. The income tax, income was a term defined back as far as 1863, in the middle of the Civil War. And the Internal Revenue Code still has those code regulations that far that talk about income, talk about what it is. So the IRS's presumption that the 16th Amendment is what created the tax on income, just a facade, and that's where they lumped in people's wages and turned it around and called that as income as well. But let's get an idea of what actual income is. And these are all, again, Supreme Court cases, every one of them. There might be an appeals court or something in there somewhere, but I tried to pick out the choicest ones. And you can see the dates. This is all, some of it goes back 1918. This is back when everyone knew what income was. Okay, the Treasury cannot, by interpretive regulations, make income of that which is not income within the meaning of revenue acts of Congress, nor can Congress, without apportionment, tax as income that which is not income within the meaning of the 16th Amendment. Now that brings up the topic. There's only two lawful ways to tax Americans: directly, with apportionment, meaning it's apportioned out according to the population. If a tax is owed by Chicago and a tax is owed by another city that could be way smaller, the tax amount is in relation to how many people there. So that person, if there's 10,000 people and 1,000 people respectively in those two towns, the people that have 10,000 are going to pay a lesser share than the other town. Anyway, that's again another topic. Let's go to the next case. That was 1943 during the World War II. This one here, we must reject, in this case, the broad contention submitted in behalf of the government that all receipts, everything that comes in, like your wage, are income within the proper definition of the term income. Now, this will make sense down the road, but I just want to give you these are standing, never overturned Supreme Court cases. Income as defined by the Supreme Court means gains and profits as a result of corporate activity and profit gained through the sale or conversion of capital assets. It's mostly related to corporate activity, and corporate activity is what you would classify as a privilege tax, and we'll get into that a little bit. Now, does your private labor fit into the category of corporate activity? No. Let's go to some more Supreme Court cases. We even have some congressional testimony here, but the first one there. Freedom and right to earn a living through any lawful occupation is exempt from taxation by the federal government. 1936. They knew it. It didn't exist as a tax on wages. That didn't happen again until World War II. And I can't remember if I've got that in here, but it was a victory tax. That was a very temporary thing to help with the costs for the war. And it was repealed after the war, but they didn't bother to tell you and me and grandma and grandpa and, you know, all the way back. They did not tell anybody that it was repealed, and everybody was in the habit of doing it, and then they reinforced it, of course. So technically right now, every penny that we send in or that they collect they classify it as a gift. It's something we are voluntarily, we're assessing ourselves with that 1040 form. We are voluntarily self-assessing, stating, yep, those wages, all that money I got is legal income, and I owe this tax. Here it is. Here's my signature under the penalty of perjury. Here it is. So everyone is looked into also thinking that their wage is a tax. Now here's a congressional record. 1909. This is before 1913 and the the 16th Amendment, or even the IRS existed. It says an income tax seeks to reach the unearned wealth of the country and to make it pay its share. Now that was the original intent. Income is, let's just say that you've got $10,000 in the bank and you make $20 interest. That $20 could be classified as income, unearned wealth. You didn't do anything to receive that, it just came. And that's why corporate activity and all that's how they gain a lot of this stuff. Or the rich families and what have you. It's unearned, and that's what they wanted to tax because there was so much of it back then. Here again, in this same dialogue. But sir, when you tax a man on his income, it is because his property is productive. In other words, something is coming out of the income. Remember the previous one, a gain or profit derived from. It comes out of that, something that grows out of it. Like you got a tree, which is the income, and the profit is the fruit that comes off of the tree. Anyway, I don't want to get too confusing here. He pays out of his abundance because he has got the abundance. It doesn't attack the principle. It never attacks the principle. But everybody that pays wages, salary, and compensation tax is like having a tree and you're going up and lopping off branches instead of taking the fruit off of the tree. Some more cases. Income as used in the statute should be given a meaning so as not to include everything that comes in, and we've seen that in another case. The true function of the words gains and profits is to limit the meaning of the word income. But the IRS classifies all those three as one particular, all the same thing. They say gains, profits, and income derived from something, wages, salary, and compensation for services. So that's how we've gotten roped into it. You can't, how do you derive income from income? they're saying that all three of those words, it says very differently. The true function of the words gains and profits, something that comes out of, is to limit the meaning of the word income. Income is a gain and a profit. It is not a wage, salary, or a compensation for service. Black's Law Dictionary, a tax on the yearly profits, income tax, a tax on the yearly profits arising from property, professions, trades, and offices.
Jeff,
Now,
I have a
people say
question.
Professions and trades. Those, well, a trade, that could be classified as labor, but we already saw that if you're working for a living, that can't be a taxed item. And word trade in the IR code, it actually directly addresses the position of an office, like an officer or somebody who works for the government. Again, this may seem convoluted, and it is. You guys have so many smoke and mirrors on these things to confuse us. But I just want to give these basic things that show.
Jeff, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. Are you open to questions, or do you want to just keep talking?
Say that again.
Are you open to questions,
Oh, yeah.
or you just want to keep talking?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's
Okay, well, I'm noticing that your Black's Law Dictionary is the 2nd edition. Has it changed in later editions? I think they're at the 9th edition now, maybe the 11th.
Oh yeah, there's quite a few. But see, the issue is showing you what the original intent is. Now, Black's Law Dictionary is that still is a legal, lawful dictionary that you can use in a court of law.
No, Black's Law Dictionary is not a legal dictionary. It's well, let me try that again. Black's Law Dictionary is Black's Law Dictionary. It is as the courts say, indicative but not dispositive. So anyway, I just wanted to make the point that just because you have an edition of Black's Law Dictionary, there are later editions, and one could argue that the later editions are more substantive than the earlier ones. Okay, I apologize. Continue.
No, that's all right. And if anybody else thinks of questions, just write them down because we can address those things. But my answer to that is obviously if a fraud is being perpetrated or considered and it goes through the course of years and literally decades of time, they are going to try to support their position and their what they're trying to foist on the American public. So later editions, it's not surprising that there may be things that they're not going to come in here and make this definition of no effect, because this is showing back then, 2nd edition, I don't remember what year that was, but as we're talking about original intent, they knew what income tax was at that time, and this is just supporting what all of these cases, I'm sure this was right in the same realm of 1918, 1916, 1900s, in that range. So it's just showing what the original intent and that congressional testimony, what they knew, what it was. Everybody, there was no question that
We have
salary
Jeff,
compensation. Yeah.
we have a question from the floor or comment.
Okay.
No, I think he's making the point of original intent.
Oh,
I really
okay.
don't have any disagreement with it.
Then we have you're going to have to yell.
They changed the definition of everything in the Constitution, but us original intent people like to go back to what the words meant when the Constitution was written.
Did you hear that, Jeff?
Yes, he was very clear.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Jeff.
Yes, that. Is there another question?
Yes, there is.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned the 16th Amendment was a fraud. Can you talk about Missouri, Oklahoma, and Oregon failing to ratify the same language, but merely being deemed to have ratified it? That's the fraud.
It's kind of an early question about the 16th Amendment fraud. I know you're going to be getting to that later. The question was about some of the states ratified different language.
Yes, well, that brings up, okay, let's address that now, because The 16th Amendment, there's two branches of thought: that it was never legally ratified, and I've got two books on my shelf right back here that were called The Law That Never Was, by Benson. He went to every state legislature in all 50 states, and he's proven that the 16th Amendment was never properly ratified. Now, that being said, it doesn't matter if it was ratified legally or it wasn't ratified. Even if it was properly ratified, that did not authorize a new tax. And we'll get into that when we get to Supreme Court cases that state very clearly that the 16th Amendment did not authorize any kind of a new tax on Americans. And the IRS is trying to claim that it did. So again, original intent is the biggie, because that's where our failing as a nation, because we're forgetting our roots, we're forgetting original intent, we're forgetting the Constitution, we're forgetting history. And that's why we're suffering the way we are. But the cat's out of the bag on this particular thing, and then sooner or later, whether it's my case or somebody else's case, it's going to be exposed. Anyway, we'll carry on, and we'll get into the 16th Amendment a little bit more down the road bit here. But this Edwards case, 1916, the statute and the statute alone determines what is income to be taxed. It taxes only income derived from many different sources. One does not derive income by rendering services and charging for them. Very simple. 1916. This is actually from the Treasury Department's own files, 1941. It says here, for 1936, taxable income tax returns filed represented only 3.9% of the population. Only a small portion of the population of the United States is covered by the income tax. Well, does that mean that only 3.9% of the population of America was working for a wage in 1939 or in 1936? Of course not. But they knew that income tax was a corporate profit tax. It was a tax on unearned income or a corporate profit. And we'll get a little bit more into that. And this is the New York Times article, which again, that actually stands as, you can use that as evidence even in a court, because it's you don't have to have it certified. It's self-authenticating is what they call it. But the poor man or the man in moderate circumstances does not regard his wages or salary as an income that would have to pay its proportionate tax under this new system. In other words, the 16th Amendment. Now, this is one of the better ones. There's a couple like this, but this is a classic. And look at this. Look at the date of that. Gross income and not gross receipts is the foundation of income tax liability. See that? Gross income and not just everything that comes in. The general term income is not defined in the Internal Revenue Code. Gross income means the total sales less the cost of goods sold, plus any income from investments and from incidental or outside operations or sources. There's a clear distinction between profit and wages or compensation for labor. Compensation for labor cannot be regarded as profit within the meaning of the law. The word profit is a different thing altogether from mere compensation for labor. The claim that salaries, wages, and compensation for personal services are to be taxed as an entirety and therefore must be returned by the individual who performed the services is without support either in the language of the Act, the 16th Amendment, or in the decisions of the courts construing it, and is directly opposed to the Act and to the regulations of the Treasury Department. Now see, even here, this court recognized that there was this distinction. Now, I guarantee you this wasn't put on the New York Times front page. Staple, another classic, and this goes back to 37. Income within the meaning of the 16th Amendment, and again, that was in 1913 when the 16th Amendment was ratified, and Revenue Act, which means gains. In such connection, gains means profit, proceeding from property, severed from capital, however invested or employed, and come in, received, or drawn by the taxpayer for his separate use, benefit, and disposal. Income is not a wage or compensation for any type of labor. Very clear stuff. Next one, reasonable compensation for labor or services rendered is not profit. So hopefully we're starting to stand fit. Lucas Earl, this is another one of the biggest classic ones. The claims that salary, wages, and compensation for personal services are to be taxed, and the previous 1976 case that we had, let's see, Ballard, that one was taking some of the very terminology that we see here. The claim that salaries, wages, and compensation for personal services are to be taxed as an entirety and therefore must be returned by the individual who has performed the services is without support. And it's the same thing there, same language. Not only this, but it directly opposed, the Treasury Department, which either prescribes or permits that compensation for personal services not be taxed as an entirety and not be returned by the individual performing the services. It has to be noted by the language of the Act, it is not salary, wages, or compensation for personal services that are to be included in gross income. That which is to be included is gains, profits, and income derived from salaries, wages, or compensation for personal services. So you have your compensation, you have your wage, you get it every week, and you take some of that and you put it into a bank account. You use what you have to do. It costs us money to make a living. And if you have a house over, a roof over your head, that costs money. You have a vehicle, that costs money. Food costs money. Insurance costs money. All of those things are expenses. It costs you that. So there is no gain or profit or income that comes from you getting a wage. Now, you could take a share of that, and again, like I said, put it into a bank account, and that could slowly grow up, and you could derive from your salary that you put into the bank account, you could derive some interest. That technically could be classified as income, but there's another tangent there because they're violating the direct and indirect taxation on people. And right now they are classifying income taxes, your wage tax, as they're taxing you directly, which is unconstitutional, and it's already been ruled unconstitutional. But nobody's fighting this stuff. So hopefully you can see the derived from element, and that's right in the code itself. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, it's just a profit or a gain. That's what it has to be. And like I said, your wage is you are selling your service. You are exchanging X number of dollars for an hour of your labor. Now, your labor, it costs something for you to produce that labor. The IRS says your labor is totally free, and we can tax that. We can look at the whole thing and then tax you a certain percentage of the whole thing because it's all income. It's all gains and profit to you, which is a big fat lie. Yes, does it cost you anything? Any of those things: food, shelter, clothing, insurance, vehicle, gas, even going down and having a meal out or some kind of recreation. All those are part of the costs of you being able to get up the next morning and go and exchange your labor for money. See, right here is another case, 1915. Included in the right of personal liberty, here's another case supporting that, and the right of private property are taking of the nature of each is the right to make contracts for the acquisition of property. Money is property. The chief among such contracts, instead of personal employment, by which in labor and other services are exchanged for money or other forms of property. If this right be struck down or arbitrarily interfered with, there is a substantial impairment of liberty in the long-established constitutional sense. The right is as essential to the laborer as to the capitalist, to the poor as to the rich. For the vast majority of persons have no other artist's way to begin to acquire property save by working for money. So when they tax our labor, they are literally hindering and preventing us from being able to accumulate, like the savings account, or investing it in something else, or investing it in property or something like that. They are cutting off that ability to, the large millions, tens if not 100 million Americans in this country. Everyone's scraping by right now. But that's their intent. That's a way of control. If people have money, they have freedom. You have freedom, and money is power too. It's a tool. Let's see, another case, 1873 here. It shows you how far back they knew. Property is everything which has an exchangeable value, and the right of property includes the power to dispose of that according to the will of the owner. Labor is property, and as such, merits protection. The right to make it available is next in importance to the rights of life and liberty. It lives to a large extent the foundation of most other forms of property and of all solid individual national prosperity. So again, he's just saying that your property, your money, your wage is able to, like the tree, produce fruit. It comes derived from the wage. It isn't the wage itself. I don't know what the year is on the Adkins case, but in principle, there could be no difference between the case of selling labor and the case of selling goods. Now, if you have a business, everybody knows that you've got all those deductions. And I guarantee you, they beat the bushes to try to find every possible deduction that they can, so that at the end of it, their income, which is what's left, that is what is lawfully called income, there's very little, if any, left. They want to make sure that it all gets put into, more property, more goods, more something, so that they don't have to pay that tax on those profits, on that gain that they made after all expenses.
Jeff, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I love this presentation of yours. I think these references would be nice to be able to find again. Is there a way we can find this list out on the internet or something like that to refer back to it?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is just a smattering of cases. The filings that I have, especially the last Supreme Court case that I filed, the certiorari, the petition for certiorari, that has everything in it, very well explained, very well listed out. All of these cases are in there, and it builds the case in a much better way than you can do in 45 minutes.
So, Jeff, would you mind sending me this PowerPoint so I can hand it off to?
Yeah, no worries.
I can do that,
and I've got links at the end
Bill.
of this that you can go to, and there's reams of documentation, from a lot of other people. A lot of people have done a lot of work, and I've just tried to compile the choicest pieces in my argument.
Well, I'd love to see the PowerPoint. That'd be great if you could send that to Ralph. That'd be awesome.
Now notice this, the last one there. There must be gain before there is income within the 16th Amendment. Now they call your wage income, but they make the clear distinction that gain is different than income. Or it says, basically it says the same thing. It has to be a gain. Income has to be a gain. It can't be something that is not a gain. 1878. So perhaps the true question is this: is income property in the sense of the Constitution, and must it be taxed at the same rate as other property? The fact is, property is a tree. Income is the fruit. Labor is a tree. Income, the fruit. The tree, labor is the tree. Income, the fruit. Capital is the tree. Income, the fruit. So it's always something that comes from the initial source. 1991 here, length, there is no material difference between labor and wages. There is no gain or profit. They are equal, exchanged. Your labor is worth something contrary to what the IRS claims. And and that's not an actual quote. The in quote side is no material difference between labor and wages. That is in that cottage case. So what is income? It's a corporate profit, interest from an account, unearned wealth, dividends, anything that is above and beyond the principal. It can only come from, out of. They can't make your wage the same thing as income, because it is not. That's another topic of United States citizen. If you were to ask me, are you a United States citizen, I'd have to ask what United States are you defining? Define the United States. And there's 3 different lawful definitions of United States, so they use a lot of the wordsmithing to confuse people. But I don't want to. I'll just tantalize you with that little topic, because there's entire documents that go into detail on how they've roped people into being a United States, basically a federal corporate citizen of the federal United States, not the 50 little U United, states, the Union, but the United States as a corporate entity. And they've made all of us a citizen of that entity through subterfuge, and that's another topic. Well, you can see here that describes the 3 different ones, and we better get moving along here. But there's separate documents on the one website go into detail into all of these, and probably way more things than you would even want to begin to look at. But
Jeff, you just mentioned there's details on a website. Could you tell us what website you're talking about?
Probably the one that has the most detail of everything is called Foundation for Truth in Law. All strung together, foundationfortruthinlaw.org. That's one. There's 3 or 4 others that have a fair amount of information, but that's got the most. That's got a separate directory for the IRS and all of these cases. I've got all my cases filed and what they filed back and how they're beating around the bush like crazy. They will not answer any of those Supreme Court cases. Every court that I've been in, they refuse due process. They have refused to answer any one of those court cases or refute it. They just completely ignore it. The courts are ignoring it too. The IRS ignores it, and the courts support it, stating, well, that's frivolous. That doesn't have any merit. Well, but that's a violation of due process.
We have a question from the floor, Jeff.
All right.
2 cases of people who fought the IRS, and one is Bernie, who was a FedEx pilot. They sent her, you must file a tax form with us for 13 years in a row, and she sent them a letter asking by what authority they were demanding it. They ignored her letter. They finally hauled her up on 13 felony counts. She got a good lawyer, and he explained to the jury that she couldn't possibly know what her obligations were, and if the IRS didn't explain them to her, then she should be acquitted. She was. And the other is Kevin Cullinane, who taught Freedom School and was called before a federal judge and ordered to meet with the IRS and to bring all of his books and records. He put his books and records in an envelope and sealed it, took it with him. They said, please show it to us. He said, no, I wasn't ordered to do that. I was just ordered to bring them. He set up a tape recorder in the middle of the table, asked them if that was okay. They had the conversation, and he said, I think what you're trying to do is convict me. They said, oh yes, we're going to throw you in jail for a long time. He then sent them a copy of the transcript of the tape recorder, gave them 2 weeks. He then sent the transcript to the judge. When they then met in federal court, the prosecutor was frothing at the mouth to convict him, and he said, Your Honor, under the 5th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, I decline to answer because they are threatening to make me a witness against myself. I don't have to do that. The judge threw the case out, and so it is possible to get due process. You just have to work at it awfully hard.
Yeah, well, the first case was Bernice Kuglin. I'm familiar with that one. And what was the name of the second?
Kevin Cullinane, and he's a bit older now, but he has been fighting this for a long time. He teaches Freedom School. He now runs a school in Tennessee. They were going after $50,000. The judge asked about what it was. The prosecutor said, oh yes, he owes us a bunch of money, and the judge threw it out, said the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution overrules your petty concerns, and the prosecutor was quite embarrassed, but he walked free.
Yeah, that's good. Like I said, the cat's out of the bag on this. It's just a matter of time before some court looks at it, and I'm hoping that this United States Court of Federal Claims is doing it, because it's been in there for months, and I'm hoping this judge is doing her due diligence to look over the evidence and realize I've been deprived of due process in every one of those courts. And I'm going to file a motion to vacate a void judgment with the tax court and probably several other courts too, because if you're denied due process and they refuse to look at the evidence or give you findings of fact and conclusions of law as to why they decided against you, which they have to do, they have to have it in the record, which they never did, they haven't done it yet, that's a violation of due process, and that makes void any previous ruling that the courts have done. So the truth is on my side, on our side, but it's getting these guys to fess up, because it'll be a game changer. And this one, this is the 14th Amendment. Everyone hears about that, but that's the amendment that basically was created to provide blacks with citizenship. That's the primary purpose of the 14th Amendment. And notice it says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That was because blacks did not have legal citizenship in these United States. So this was their attempt to give them a citizenship, which means that they were made a citizen of the United States, not these United States. It was made a corporate federal citizen. We'll get into that a little bit more. But anyway, they roped the rest of us into that and took us out of our just our state citizenship rank and included us into the federal jurisdiction. Notice the subject to the jurisdiction of. If you live in Washington, D.C., in Samoa, in the Virgin Islands, in any of the territories, that makes you subject to the jurisdiction of that United States. If you're a private American citizen living in any one of the 50 states, you are a national. You are a state, I'm a Colorado national. That's what I am. I'm not a federal United States citizen. And again, that gets into more of their wordsmithing and how they're using that in our Social Security system, using it in the IRS system, and you have to refute it. You have to say, no, that does not apply to me. You have no jurisdiction over me. And they cannot prove it. Now see, the question to ask yourselves right now, let me interject. I've been asking the IRS for years, let's go to court. Charge me with evading taxes, willful failure to file. Charge me with whatever. Let's go to court. Let's get a jury, and let's get this thing over with. They haven't done it. They will not do it. Because, number one, my paper trail, and number two, they would never, ever, ever want this to go before a jury, and because the jury would see through it, they would realize the fraud that's taking place. And that brings up another thing. When I filed this United States Court of Federal Claims case against the IRS, I also filed a motion for summons of a grand jury because the judicial system is interfering with our access, the people's access to the grand jury. They're controlling it. And the Supreme Court, again, there's many more cases on it, but the case itself is on that same website, motion. You read very clearly that we have the authority to access the grand jury. Well, this court, no other court that I've ever filed that in has put it on the docket. Well, this court did. They actually put it right on the docket, which I'm sure makes the IRS very nervous, because that means that it's possible that we could get a grand jury of citizens, private citizens, to look at the evidence in this and bring indictments against the IRS, bring indictments against the IRS, the head, Koskinen, I think his name is.
Jeff, we have a question from the floor.
Okay.
Will our economy look like when you win your case, and how does that compare with the remaining economies in the world?
Remember, every penny of the taxes that you or anybody else pays from your wage isn't going towards anything except the debt, the national debt. And you got to remember that the national debt itself is a fraud. And I guess let me take at least a couple minutes here. The Federal Reserve, as I said, is a private banking cartel. It's comprised of the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, wealthy banking families. They own the stock. You can't own stock in the Federal Reserve. I can't own it. Nobody else can own it. They're the only ones that own it. What they do is called fractional reserve banking. We've heard of that, fractional reserve. The U.S. dollar is a fractional reserve piece of paper. It's basically worthless. It has no backing to it. So what the Federal Reserve is doing is that it would be like you coming to me and you want to borrow money. So I sit down and I write out a check to you, or I just type up, here's your loan of $25,000. I move it. I just put some digits in your account. Well, that's how they do it. That money does not exist until they put it into digits and put it into your account and create it. Then they turn around and say, oh, by the way, there's 7% interest on this creation of money that we just gave you. Well, that's what they're doing with the U.S. government. They give us money, and then they turn around and charge us interest for it. It's not out of their pocket. It's not real money. It's digits. It's smoke and mirrors. It does not exist. That's why the national debt is a debt, like Ron Paul said years ago. He said that's a fraudulent debt. We just turn around and walk away from it because it's not ours. That is on the head of the Federal Reserve and those banking families because they're stealing trillions, not just from us, but from the whole world. So there is no relationship to what happens except in the fact that the IRS would lose control and power over Americans, and Americans might actually prosper. Can you imagine? That would be a 30% at least pay raise for everybody across America. So it would be a boon, and then all the paperwork that corporations have to do, they have to deal with the W's, the W-2s, W-9s, they have to withhold taxes, they have to do all these things, and they're not even being paid to do that for the IRS. Imagine corporations suddenly having that burden lifted. It's gone. And then the third tangent on that is we have to remember that probably 75% of the existing government functions today are all unconstitutional, which is why we have the budget that we do. The limited government used to be.
Jeff?
Yeah.
Is that noise coming at your end?
No.
Okay.
Like
Anyway, I need to stop this recording for 1 minute and then for less than a minute, and then start it again for technical reasons.
Okay.
So hold on while I terminate this recording.